Melee weapons in Fortnite are often at the center of much controversy, and over the years we have seen some incredible melee weapons, but also some really lackluster melee weapons, and today we are going to rank every single melee weapon in Fortnite's history. As a quick side note, I will not be ranking the Mandalorian's Amban sniper rifle here, as that did have a melee attack, but it wasn't its own melee weapon, so I won't count it here. And I would like to preface at the beginning of this video, I am mostly ranking them on not only just the melee attack, but also if they have some other benefit to them, they're going to be higher on this list, such as something like the kinetic blade, where you can use it as mobility and a melee weapon. I will also be grouping the TMNT mythics together, as well as the lightsabers. It just makes everything more succinct and clear. And if you go on to enjoy this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, use code TYFRYZ in the Fortnite item shop if you'd like to support the work here I do on YouTube. But finally, let's get right into this ranking. Alright, these bottom 5 are weapons that you should probably never pick up, and you're almost going to get killed every single time you use them, so good luck. Starting at number 15 is the Sideways Scythe. I do actually believe this is the worst melee weapon we have ever seen. It's just way too clunky and way too slow. When you're in a box with somebody with a melee weapon, you need something fast, quick, that you're going to be able to move around with and avoid those big shotgun shots, and this was just not it. The Scythe was introduced in Chapter 2, Season 8, and has never come back since, and probably never will come back again. As well as this, you had extremely limited mobility, and honestly, the only advantage you got from this was the higher FOV you would get when picking it up. And in our number 14 slot is actually just the harvesting tool, the regular pickaxe that every Fortnite player on the map spawns in with. Yes, I actually do believe this is better than the Sideways Scythe. At least with the harvesting tool, you just get it when you spawn in. You don't have to worry about go looking for it or opening chests or going into these big zombie bubble things from Chapter 2, Season 8. No, like, you just get it. So its availability makes it a little bit better in my opinion. Now, we are talking about the harvesting tool doing 20 damage a hit. When it did 10, it was definitely the worst melee weapon. But like 20 damage honestly isn't terrible. Look, I know the Sideways Scythe does more damage, but I just think the harvesting tool is better. Also, like, you can farm mats with it. You can get materials. I mean, that's a pretty good bonus, I would say. It's like just comparing bad and even worse, so it really doesn't matter which one was 14 or 15, but I don't know. I think the harvesting tool was better. I mean, you hit somebody for 160 with your shotgun, your SMG's not reloaded, just give them 2 swings of the pickaxe, they're done. And at the number 13 spot, we have the Kingsman Umbrella. If you didn't know the Kingsman Umbrella existed, I wouldn't blame you. It was barely in the game during Chapter 2, Season 2, and a lot of people think this was a collab weapon, but that's actually not the case. This was never part of an official collaboration in Fortnite. And the Kingsman Umbrella was simply just a worse version of lightsabers. It had basically 1 or 2 saving graces. One, you could block a very little amount of bullets, maybe 10-15 bullets you could block with the umbrella, and you could also save yourself from fall damage, which of course is always a good thing. The Kingsman Umbrella though really struggles with that final hit. I don't know if you remember, but after 2 or 3 swings, it would like super wind up, almost like you're swinging a baseball bat, and that animation would take forever. You'd just be a sitting duck. But in a season where close range weapons were absolutely dominant, like the Spaz shotgun, Midas's drum gun, Brutus's minigun, really good SMG meta, the Kingsman Umbrella was just not it at all. And at number 12, we have the Howler Claws, which were again just barely in the game in Chapter 3, Season 4. And some of you guys may actually have expected these to be lower on the list, maybe as the worst or the second worst, but they're actually not terrible. Don't get me wrong, they're bad. I still believe they're a bottom 5 melee weapon ever, but the marking ability, that kind of recon ability, if you remember, you'll howl and then it'll give the kind of red mark above any opponent's heads that are closed. That's pretty helpful. I think the Howler Claws get a bad rap because they are a mythic item, and they should not be a mythic item, right? And when you compare an item like this to, let's just say, the Foundation's MK7, right? Those are in the same category of weapon. The Howler Claw absolutely falls to the bottom. I also just think it was too much work to go out of your way and have to do the ritual at the altar, I believe it was, and then you had to get the Howler Claws when you emoted there for a little bit. Like, I don't know many people that would go out of their way for the Howler Claws. If they dropped in a chest or something, I think it's a little bit of a different story, but for me, still a very bad melee weapon. And right in front of the Howler Claws at number 11 is Wolverine's Claws from Chapter 2, Season 4. Look, I just think that they're a better version of the Howler Claws. We knew when we saw Wolverine get introduced into Chapter 2, Season 4 that we were going to get a mythic melee weapon, and if you remember, Wolverine was actually really hard to take down, so these were not easy to get. They were actually a lot of work. Like, Wolverine was hard. I mean, he had a ton of health. He would regen his health. He would revive himself if you didn't finish him. he was tough. And I don't think that his claws were worth going through that whole fight. With that being said though, I do believe they are the best melee weapon we have seen up to this point, and you also get a pretty good mobility kind of ability here. Like, it was almost like a little mini impulse grenade. You would press the left trigger and then you would kind of go flying into the air for a little bit. And he also had a really good smash ability where you would like spin in the air and it would do like really good damage to structure. So for that, it is pretty good. But again, as a mythic item, I just don't think it stands up to other mythic items. And these bottom 5 items are honestly items that if you're in a box with somebody, most of the time you're just going to get shotgun to the face anyways. And at number 10, we have yet another mythic. That's She-Hulk's Fist. And the previous 5 items, I think, are items that are definitively the 5 worst melee weapons. But She-Hulk's Fist, I think you could put a couple of spots higher. It was actually really good. But unfortunately, it just falls in that number 10 spot. Like, ahead of this, we have just so much better melee weapons that are coming up. The one thing I will say about She-Hulk's Fist is you had a really awesome, like, mobility, like, jump in the air attack that would, like, slam down. That was a really good attack. And I just thought that this was more satisfying to use. Again, those melee weapons where you're just kind of static in one spot, it's hard to move around quick, are not great. But with She-Hulk's Fist, you could almost treat it like a little shockwave grenade. If you want to get out of a box, just pop that ability, you go flying into the air. Like, it was pretty good. Again, cut me some slack if I don't go into crazy detail about these melee weapons, because I was never a crazy user of melee weapons. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but She-Hulk's Fist, I have gotten killed by a couple times. They're not bad. And number 9 is the Chains of Hades, and I'm waiting for everybody in the comments to rip me on this one. It seems like all my subscribers absolutely love the Chains of Hades, but they're not my favorite. Look, yes, you can hit people through walls. I get it. And the one thing that the Chains of Hades have over melee weapons here is actually the range. Chains of Hades had pretty good range for a melee weapon, right? When you think of melee, you think you got to be right inside of their box, like right next to them, just smacking them in the face. But with Chains of Hades, you actually got pretty good range. You could bring somebody closer to you from, I don't know, 15, 20 meters away. Look, they're not a bad melee weapons. I think we're starting to get into the point of this list where the melee weapons are starting to become pretty good and pretty usable. I just thought in Chapter 5, Season 2, I didn't think that there was a spot in my inventory where I would take the Chains of Hades over something else. And in my opinion, that's all it really comes down to. I just felt like I never wanted to hold the Chains of Hades over my shotgun or over my SMG or over my sniper. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, at the number 8 spot, we have the TMNT melee weapons / mythics. I'm keeping them all together in one because it would just be too difficult to rank all of them separately. They're all pretty similar. And these are really solid weapons. They're all really good. Not only as a melee weapon are they good, but also the mobility. And this is the first time in the list where we're really starting to see like solid melee weapons also have solid mobility aspects, right? Those previous items are mainly just melee weapons, right? But now we're starting to get into some items that also have mobility as well, which puts them higher on the list. They were just fun to use. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a super fun IP, and this whole collab was a really good idea, and I think a lot of people enjoyed just using these kind of iconic melee weapons, right? I mean, you know, Leonardo's katanas, Michelangelo's nunchucks, like those types of things. Those are iconic weapons, and they weren't that difficult to get your hands on, right? And I think that's also something that's important to consider here. And at number 7, we have lightsabers, and I think this is the first controversial pick on this list. Lightsabers are probably like the most popular melee weapons in Fortnite. I don't think that's a crazy statement to make, and they were just too difficult to rank by themselves because there's so many different types of lightsabers. I wasn't going to rank them just because they had different colors, you know what I'm saying? So I kept them all here together. But what I will say is the lightsabers got a pretty big revamp, and not even entirely a revamp. I can't even say that because they just added new versions of the lightsabers that were really, really good. I always just felt like the Chapter 2 Season 1 lightsabers, the original ones, were always like kind of mid, to be honest with you. Like, really all they did was just act as a melee weapon and then just block bullets. But then once they started giving them like these special abilities where you could, like, you know, pick up the ground and throw them at your opponent, like, okay, then they started to get really strong. So honestly, I think you could move them anywhere on this list, higher or lower. I think you would be able to do that. I don't think that they're a great melee item, but I also don't think they're a terrible one. That's why they're like really smack dab in the middle of this list. At number 6, we have Chapter 5 Season 1's Grapple Blade. And I'll be honest with you, I actually really miss the Grapple Blade. This was a must-have in my opinion in Chapter 5. And honestly, I actually think of the Grapple Blade as more of a mobility weapon than a melee weapon, but it is a melee weapon, so it gets put on this list. My only complaint with the Grapple Blade is sometimes it just did feel a little bit clunky, as in it just didn't really feel smooth to use. Like, for example, I think the ODM gear would be an example of something that was a lot smoother to use than the Grapple Blade, but kind of functioned similarly. But it just wasn't that bad of a melee weapon, and it was really versatile, right? You could use it as mobility, you could use it as a melee weapon, or if you remember, you could like grab somebody with it and you would do that 10 damage and you would like latch onto them. Like, that's pretty cool. cool. I thought the grapple blade was a really good item, really creative and unique item in Chapter 5, and I honestly wish it would come back. And now we have reached the number 5 spot. These are these items that really just stand above the rest and almost automatic pickups when you see them on the ground. With that being said, at number 5, we have the Nitro Fist from our current season, Chapter 5, Season 3. On launch, I think you could make the argument this is a top 3 melee weapon ever, probably top 2. Pre-nerf, you could just run through anybody's walls with this thing. It was unreal, and if you played at the beginning of the season, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is that part of the list where we really start to see the mobility come out of some of these melee weapons. When you combine incredible mobility with a really good melee weapon, yeah, it's going to be a fun time. Again, like I had mentioned, when these things launched, they were so strong, but they got absolutely nerfed into the ground. I'm just reading the patch notes here. Increased Nitro Fist reload cooldown from 8 seconds to 11 seconds, reduced air punch damage against players from 70 to 50, reduced punch structure damage from 130 to 60, reduced air punch damage from 250 to 90. Like, it just keeps going. It got absolutely nerfed into the ground, and now I think it's just kind of an okay melee weapon, but a really good mobility weapon, so that's kind of where it gets the balance from. It also just feels really satisfying and really fun to use, so I'll give it that too. At number 4, we have the ODM gear, and honestly, I think you can make an argument for this to be number 2 or 3. It was a really good item, and again, you're going to keep hearing it with these items in the top 5. The mobility is just incredible and almost kind of outshines the actual melee factor of the weapon. And this was just a really versatile weapon, right? Of course, the main function was the grapple effect for mobility, but also you can grapple onto 2 points at once. You also have the attacking function, which of course is the melee ability, which is kind of interesting because you're able to like prepare and then launch the attack, right? Which grapples you onto the reticle. You also have that like rotating, spinning area of effect attack. And then even after you hit somebody, you have that little shockwave effect where you like float in the air. And even more importantly, you can attack several times back to back to back. It's just relentless. There's no real cooldown on the attack. I don't think there's any surprise to anybody watching this video to see this in the top 5, and honestly, I think some people would probably push it higher. And this is an example of a melee weapon that deserves the mythic rarity. And inside our top 3 now, at number 3 is the Kinetic Blade. I am a sucker for the Kinetic Blade. I love this weapon. It is one of my favorite weapons in Fortnite history. If you played Chapter 4 Season 2, you know this thing absolutely plagued that entire season. Every player had to be carrying a Kinetic Blade. It was everywhere. And yes, while most players would pair a shotgun with the Kinetic Blade and use it mainly for mobility, I think the melee aspect was okay. Again, in a season where the shotgun, the Havoc Pump Shotgun, was so strong, not a lot of people use the melee ability. I think that kind of goes forgotten about, right? When you hear Kinetic Blade, you strictly think about the mobility aspect of the item. And of course, we also saw this come back in Chapter 4 Season 4 as Thorn's Vampiric Blade as a melee weapon, and that was a really good item as well. This is yet again another example of one of those items that is an elite mobility item paired with a pretty good mythic ability, and combine the two, you get a really solid weapon. And at the number 2 spot, I'm sure you've been waiting for it to be somewhere on this list, that's the Shockwave Hammer. Up to this point, I believe the Shockwave Hammer has the best actual pure melee ability that we have seen so far. The ability to just swing the hammer straight on somebody and send them flying away from you is extremely valuable, right? Getting somebody out of your box, just hit them with the hammer, see you later, they're gone. It was really strong, not to mention the mobility aspect of the Shockwave Hammer is arguably the best mobility item ever. I think you could make that argument. But up to this point, I think we've seen like the Kinetic Blade and ODM gear, probably like 70% mobility you would use it for, like 30% melee. But at this point, I would say it's probably even with the Shockwave Hammer, 50% melee, 50% mobility, and that's good. That's what you like to see. The problem was just both were extremely strong. Just the mobility aspect and the melee aspect put two extremely strong abilities together, and you get one of the best items ever. The melee ability from the Shockwave Hammer really stands out because the area of effect. Somebody could be like 10 feet away from you and you slam that hammer in front of them, you still hit them. Like, you did not need to be right on top of somebody. And honestly, the only reason why it's not in the number 1 spot is because of how long the animation is after you swing into the ground. If you go to swing and hit somebody and you miss them, you are basically dead. To pull the hammer up out of the ground, it takes way too long, and so you're basically banking on the fact that you're going to hit somebody, because if you miss them, you're basically a free sitting duck. No surprises here, the Shockwave Hammer is absolutely insane. But speaking of absolutely insane, at our number 1 spot, you knew it was going to be on here, you're probably just waiting for it, that's going to be the Infinity Blade. And honestly, I don't even want to spend too much time on it, because you guys know how overpowered this was. It literally won somebody, I believe it was Psalm, the entire Winter Royale when it was added into it. Instant siphon on kills. You had a ton of health, a ton of shield, the dash ability. You could just like jump in the air. I mean, it was so broken. It should have never been in the game, and there's a reason why it will never come back, except for the LTM, of course. It just absolutely outclasses every other melee weapon that has ever been in the game. It was only in the game for like a week, I believe. The fact that this even made it through testing is just beyond me, and there's just no other melee weapon that stacks up against it. You knew it had to be here at the #1 spot. So yeah, that's my listing for every single melee weapon in Fortnite history. Let me know in the comment section below, did I miss any? There's a chance I could have missed a few. Let me know what you think of the list. Would you switch a couple around? Be sure to let me know, because I like to talk to you guys down there. Again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.